Next time a long freight train rolls past you, look closely at the order of the cars. It seems random. A boxcar, a tanker, a couple of empty flat cars, a hopper loaded with grain. Just a jumble of whatever they had in the yard, hooked together and sent down the line. Except it is not random, not even close. Somewhere in a rail yard, before that train ever moved, somebody made a series of very deliberate decisions about exactly where every single car would go. And the most important rule of all is this: the heaviest, most loaded cars go up front, right behind the locomotives. The light and empty cars go to the back. Get that order wrong, put the heavy cars in the wrong spot, and you do not just get an inefficient train. You get a pile of twisted steel in a ditch, because the position of the weight in a freight train is, quite literally, a matter of life and death. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We want to know who's out there. To understand why, you have to understand a secret about freight trains that almost nobody outside the railroad knows. A freight train is not one solid object. It is a long, loose chain. Every car is connected to the next by a coupler, and those couplers are deliberately not tight. There is slack in every connection, a few inches of free play, and across a mile-long train, all that slack adds up to many feet of movement. Railroaders call it slack action. That looseness is there on purpose. It is what lets the train bend around curves, and it is what lets a locomotive start a heavy train at all, because the engine does not yank the whole train into motion at once. It pulls the first car, which travels a few inches, and then tugs the second, which tugs the third, and the movement ripples down the line, starting the cars one at a time. Think about the numbers. On a 50-car train, there can be around 2 inches of slack at every coupler, which adds up to 100 inches of total play, over 8 feet, gathered up one connection at a time. By the time the slack reaches the last car, that final car can get snapped into motion at several miles an hour in an instant. That is the banging and crashing you hear when a freight train starts to move. That is the slack running out car by car, like a whip being cracked down the length of the train. But that same slack, that same looseness that makes the train work, is also what can tear it apart. Because those few feet of play mean the cars are constantly bunching up and stretching out as the train speeds up, slows down, and rolls over hills. And that creates two opposing forces that fight each other inside the train all day long. When the train pushes together, when the cars bunch up and shove against each other, that is called buff. When the train stretches out, when the cars pull hard against their couplers, that is called draft. Buff squeezes, draft stretches. And every mile of every trip, the train is swinging between the two. Now, here is where the weight comes in, and here is why the order is everything. Picture a heavy block of loaded cars at the back of a train, with light, empty cars in front of them. The train starts down a hill. The heavy cars at the rear keep rolling, gaining momentum, and they shove forward against the lighter cars ahead like a runaway weight behind you on a slope. All that force piles into the light cars, and light cars are easy to push around. On a curve, that shove has somewhere to go. It pushes the light car sideways, and its wheels climb up and over the rail. That is a buff derailment, and it is exactly why you never want heavy weight shoving from behind. Now, flip it. The far more famous killer is called stringlining, and it comes from draft, from stretching. Imagine the locomotive pulling hard, and somewhere back in the train sits a string of light, empty cars. As the train stretches out under that pull and goes into a curve, the taut couplers try to pull the cars into a straight line, like a string being pulled tight across the inside of a bend. A loaded car is heavy enough to resist that sideways pull and stay on the track, but a light, empty car has almost nothing holding it down. The pull drags it straight across the curve toward the inside rail, and it is yanked clean off the track. And here is the brutal little detail that makes empty cars so deadly. The only thing keeping any train wheel on the rail is a steel lip called the flange, and that flange is only about an inch tall. 1 inch. That is the entire margin between on the track and in the ditch. Engineers measure the danger as a ratio of the sideways force trying to derail the car against the downward weight holding it on the rail. A heavy loaded car has tremendous weight pressing it down, so it can shrug off a big sideways pull. An empty car has almost no weight holding it down, so even a modest sideways force can lift that 1 inch flange up and over the rail. An empty car weighs a fraction of a loaded one, so it takes far less force to derail it. That is stringlining, and it has thrown countless trains into the dirt. This is not theory. In 2024, a Union Pacific train came down off a bridge in Texas and onto a curve. You can hear the slack run in on the video. The compression force was so violent it lifted 3 empty flat cars and 3 empty tank cars clean off the rails. Over in Fostoria, Ohio, a string of empty covered hoppers string-lined on a curve from the opposite force, from too much draft, and derailed. Same lesson, opposite direction. Empty cars in the wrong place are the weak link every single time. So the rule writes itself. Keep the heavy loaded cars at the front, close to the locomotives where the pulling force is strongest and steadiest. Push the light, empty cars to the rear, where they are pulled and squeezed the least. Never bury a block of empties in the middle between heavy cars, because then the heavy cars fight each other through the empties and crush them like an accordion. The Canadian Safety Board investigated more than 10 derailments tied to exactly that mistake, describing one where the heavy tail end collided into the lighter cars ahead like a concertina and the whole thing pulled apart. And it has only gotten more dangerous because the trains have gotten longer. A generation ago, a typical train was 5,000 feet and 6,000 or 7,000 tons. Today, they run trains 12,000 feet long, 3 miles, weighing 18,000 tons. The longer the train, the more slack, the more play, the more violent those buff and draft forces become, and the more the exact placement of every heavy and light car matters. The American Federal Railroad regulators put out a formal safety warning about it, pointing to a string of derailments caused, at least in part, by empty and loaded cars mixed together in the wrong order. So, no, the order of the cars is not random. It is one of the most carefully calculated things on the entire railroad. Every train is a puzzle solved before it moves, weight balanced against length against the curves and hills it will face, all to keep those invisible forces from tearing it apart. Modern railroads run the whole consist through software that simulates the buff and draft forces at every coupler before the train ever leaves the yard. And where they place the heavy blocks, the empties, and the extra locomotives buried in the middle of the train is all part of the answer. The next time you watch a freight roll by and see the loaded cars up front and the empties trailing behind, you will know you are not looking at a random jumble. You are looking at the answer to a physics problem, worked out in a rail yard that is quietly keeping that train on the tracks. And every bang and jolt you hear as it passes is the sound of those forces at work, held in check by nothing more than the order somebody chose for the cars.